you have to react to the situation in that regard. Yet many people then look at that particular circumstance and what can I do to, deal with those issues better? It's build a better fire department, for example. How can I respond better? Whereas the better question, a better culture in quality and reliability is, where did that mistake get made in our system such that it got that far? How do I anticipate and prevent not just that issue, but that type of issue, which is usually related to a decision? Who didn't have the right information at the right time to make the right decision? And how do I get the right circumstances together so we make the better decision each time?
That's my guest, Fred Schenkelberg, next on Reliability Matters.
Welcome to Reliability Matters, a podcast for the electronic assembly industry. Each episode covers topics related to reliability, best practices, and environmentally responsible assembly techniques, with insights from experts across the electronic assembly industry. Now, here's your host, Mike Conrad.
Welcome to another episode of Reliability Matters. My guest today is someone I've actually never met. This podcast, Reliability Matters, is syndicated by Accendo Reliability through their reliability.fm podcast website. Fred Schenkelberg is the founder of both Accendo Reliability and FMS Reliability, both sites dedicated to reliability in all of its forms. Fred is an international authority on reliability engineering. He is the reliability expert at FMS Reliability, a reliability engineering and management consulting firm he founded in 2004. Fred left Hewlett Packard's reliability team, where he helped create a culture of reliability across HP to assist their organizations. His passion is working with teams to improve product reliability, customer satisfaction, and efficiencies in product development, and to reduce product risk and warranty costs. Fred has a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the United States Military Academy and a Master's of Science in Statistics from Stanford University. Welcome, Fred.
Hey, welcome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate being on your show.
Well, thanks for joining me. You are the first person I've interviewed that I actually don't know. I've gone through my my digital Rolodex.
So I'm an afterthought now.
No, not really. No, you're an evolution. You're an evolution, and you start off with people who owe you favors and all that to get them on your show, and then it occurred to me, looking at Accendo Reliability, your website, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and all the podcasts that you syndicate on it, all having something to do with reliability, that we're just kind of missing the mark. So I'm glad that you've agreed to be on this show, and I welcome you to it. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better, other than with small emails going back and forth. So
right.
Again, welcome. Let me start with this. You seem to have the perfect educational background for someone in the field of reliability. First, it seems to me that your physics degree could assist you in the design of reliable products. After all, the laws of physics never change, even in situations where an engineer or an accounting department really wants them to change. Yeah. And your Master's of Science in Statistics probably would allow you to quantify the reliability of your product statistically. So my question is, did you intend on pursuing a career in reliability, or did you stumble onto it?
Oh, definitely a stumble. And at the moment, I would add to that credentials is that this summer will be the 15th year I'm teaching a master's and PhD set of students in the University of Maryland's program, a reliability engineering management course. And they often address me as professor, not my students, because I tell them not to, but the university. They call me doctor and everything else, even though I'm not. But to answer your question, no, as I got into physics because it was the hardest curriculum in the school, and I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could. And I also had the thought that if I went into any field of engineering, the physics background would help, right? I could do anything from there, which has been true. And then the statistics later is I was working about 2-3 miles away from where the Stanford University was, and they had a remote classroom program, and our company had a setup with that. And I ended up getting halfway to a master's degree, and they didn't have any more courses offered online, but I wanted to keep going. So I drove over to campus a couple times a week and finished off my master's. And that was really just because of the statistics. I was working in a factory and studying variation and dealing with control charts and all that stuff. And then one day my boss walked into my office and said, "Can you figure out how long this thing's going to last?" And I kind of dove into the deep end of accelerated testing at that point. And then
Sure.
It's been a career ever since.
Oh, very good. Now, I read that part of your experience in your career was working at Hewlett Packard on with their reliability team. What was that like?
Well, it wasn't a reliability team when I got there. Dick Moss, was a co-author with Iverson, Coombs, and Moss. Iverson, I think that's how you pronounced it, Coombs and Moss. They wrote a reliability engineering handbook, Reliability Engineering and Management Handbook, I think is the title. And he was the sole remaining corporate reliability person, quality person, I should say, at HP when he retired. And they had a number of people on that staff over the years, but it was never a big group. You know, if you think Lockheed Martin, they might have 50 people in their corporate reliability group, and GE has a big department and stuff like that. HP never did that. It's always been in the divisions and then very light at the corporate area. The group I got hired into was a technical center, essentially. So it was about 50, mostly PhDs. I like to describe them as being too expensive for being full-time employees in any one division, any product division. But they had essential technical skills. There was material scientists, and there were folks really deep just on solder joints and electronic circuitry and CMOS technology and on, all the depth of knowledge these people had. And they asked me to join their group to be in it was like a road mapping department or group that we were in. And we were always looking at the future of electronics and trying to identify where we needed to invest so that, for example, as vias get smaller and smaller, how do we clean them? Right? Or what's the right strategy in order to take advantage of these smaller dimensions? Or where's the trouble going to be? And what do we need to do to invest to solve those things? And I was in that group for about a year. And then I saw an opportunity as Dick Moss was retiring to take on that role of the corporate reliability champion, essentially. And so I got a quarter full-time equivalent allocation of my time to explore that. And in 5 years, we had, I think, 16 or 18 people working full-time just on reliability tasks within the corporation and within the with our suppliers. And we were essentially captured consultants, right? So we didn't need to sign NDAs except with suppliers. But we took projects and got paid by the divisions to be their hired guns, essentially, for doing research projects, to doing problem solving, to doing deep failure analysis, and I got involved more on the engineering management side with setting up reliability programs and helping them craft a viable way to make decisions to improve the reliability of their programs. And so I never actually got promoted. I was always an entry level, the first step as a reliability or as an engineer. And 5 years later, I was advising group vice presidents on warranty strategy. I was at HP, I don't know, close to 8 or 9 years, and I was always at the same level as an engineer. but it was one of those companies that if you, well, you've heard it, Mike, is there's an open door policy. You can walk in and talk to anybody, essentially.
Sure.
Sometimes you got to get through the gauntlet of admins and everybody else.
It's an open door policy if you can find the door.
And so I would regularly ask embarrassing questions about reliability. And this was before warranty had to be reported on the SEC public traded company filings and stuff like that. And so it was pretty much a mess. And I asked a lot of embarrassing questions and found that it was about a $3 to $4 billion bill we paid every year, and nobody was looking at it. And so we started chipping away at that and adding more and more resources to the group I was working with, to the one point where Judy, my director at the time, she stopped by my office and said, I'm not sure how to ask this, but are you in charge of this group or am I? And I'm like, I'm in trouble. And she said, it looks like I'm just trying to staff your projects and trying to find people to solve these things. And they're exactly the right things we should be working on. We're making a huge difference in the organization, saving tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars and creating better products. It's all great stuff. But that's my job. I'm supposed to find these things. And I'm like, all right, you do the layout, who sits where, and getting the right people in here and manage them and stuff. I'll just find the project. Okay. And she said, okay. And I got to work, one-on-one with technicians and fly around the world and see all kinds of different processes and divisions and engineers in all kinds of places and all kinds of products. Plus got to work with this very senior level people in the organization on warranty policy, on strategy for positioning products, to working with outsourcing a design, for example, and what parts do we want to specify and how do we specify it? How do we make sure that we get the reliability we want? Things like that. So I had an amazing job. And along that line, a friend of mine, Mike Silverman, passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. He asked me to join his company, Ops a la carte, and do what I'm doing now, but for the industry in general. So then I was having a great time at HP, and I'd probably still be there, except that I saw I could do more outside of HP than inside. So I left there.
And you said that they noticed the change in the numbers when they formalized the reliability department.
Well, it wasn't actually ever formalized. That's the weird part. We were captured consultants, right? And it was a great place to work. It was, hey guys, I got this problem, and we'd put 4 people around the room, and Sue would chime in with, from a material science point of view, it could be this, this, and this, and a chemist would chime in, and then a physicist would chime in. And we'd very quickly get some great ideas and set up some experiments and go solve a problem. And it was nobody was looking at the clock. Nobody was looking at who does what and who's in charge. And so I could pull a team together very quickly to go solve problems, which made the group so much fun. But we were never actually called a reliability group. Even though I think when I left, we were over half of our business was directly related to reliability.
Well, and it sounds like maybe one of the reasons for the success of that project was, from what I'm hearing, is egos were left out of the room.
Yeah, by and large, I would say so. It was a very collegial because everybody knew they brought an expertise to the table and contributed that. And sometimes you're the one asking for the questions, right? And that was true across HP. We ran we called it a design for reliability email list. And it was, I don't know what platform it was on, but anybody on the list could post a question that would go out to the whole list. And if you put a question out to this list, you would get an answer pretty quickly. It'd be within an hour or two, or within a day, you would get 4 or 5 really good answers, or the answer, or the phone number of somebody that actually knows the answer, or, who's the exact right person. So that worked out pretty well.
Very good. It sounds like you didn't have much of a Maslow effect, which is, if all I have is a hammer, I see everything as a bed of nails. So your chemist didn't always think it was a chemical problem, and your electrical engineers didn't always think it was an electrical problem, and so forth.
Yeah,
or do you have a little bit of that?
Oh yeah, I'm sure there was some of that. You always approach a problem, and it's something to be cautious of when you're doing failure analysis. Is that, if you're a chemist, everything's Arrhenius equation related or something.
Right. Everyone sees through a lens.
Yeah. And what was nice though is that the team recognized that they each had their own lenses, essentially filters, and were willing to learn from each other on a regular basis. So that really made it a really fun group to be in.
Let's talk about culture for a little bit. I've cited the following phrase several times on this podcast, and that is, and something that we've experienced in our business in times past, and that is that we don't have time to do it right, but we always find time to do it over. How many times have you heard that expression? And more importantly, how many times have you experienced that firsthand?
Oh, I've heard it many times, and I've experienced it as part of my consulting work. I'd say half or at least a third of my clients are coming to me because they screwed up. They didn't think of something got out. They're either on the verge of a recall or they have a major escalation and they don't know what to deal with. And it's annoying, I guess is the right word. I'd say fascinating, but it's not. It's we saw that, but we waved our hand and thought that was a one-time thing, right? And it was some catastrophic failure that affects everything they do. Or they chose to do standard style testing, which didn't cover the new technology they were using in the potential failure mechanism. So they didn't even know how to look for the issues that they were experiencing, and they let their customers experience it. So, if you got time, Mike, I could tell you a lot. We actually did it one night. In the IEEE has a local chapter up here in the North Bay, in Northern California. And our regular rotation of meetings was going to land on Halloween. And so we decided to hold a meeting where we're going to close the door. We're all going to sign an oath that anything shared in the room would stay in the room. And then we all told horror stories of bad design decisions, rush to market, the stuff that nobody would ever want us to talk to anybody about. We had a great time. We were there till 11 o'clock at night, just telling each other these horrible stories about how we made just fundamental mistakes in the design or manufacturing and led to huge reliability problems. It was a great meeting.
That would be fun. We have our versions of those, not quite so formalized, but we have our versions of those when we commiserate,
That's
with
right.
our service team.
That's right.
So there are many competing interests on a manufacturing floor. And I'm saying this from a business owner standpoint, not a reliability expert standpoint. Some of those competing interests are production numbers, units shipped competes with production efficiencies, which would be unit costs. Culture is a competitive force, quality and reliability as separate bullet points. The last two, quality and reliability, I've grown to learn are not necessarily related. One can match their own quality standard, which may not produce a reliable product, but they're doing it the way that they're supposed to do it. Perhaps the methodology or the materials are wrong, but they are, that's what's specified. So based on your experience in the reliability industry and your reliability consultancy efforts, how do companies juggle shipments, profits, quality, reliability, culture, all of that?
Well, there's, Mike, are you familiar with the book by Phil Crosby called Quality is Free? Have you?
No, but I think I'm going to be.
Okay. It's, I don't know if it was in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there, he came out with this book. And in it was a quality maturity matrix. And like the software industry has a maturity matrix. And if you look, there's quality and reliability, and other industries have these maturity matrices. And so I adopted it for reliability. And while I was at HP, I got to do dozens and dozens of assessments to get to know the culture of organizations about how they make decisions related to reliability. And since then, in consulting, I've done hundreds of these assessments. The answer to your question is that an organization that's not mature is often caught by surprise when something goes wrong. They're like, oh, the customers are just abusing it, or this is, it's not our fault. We had a rogue supplier. They find blame rather than try to figure out how to fix it. A little bit more mature organization will do some due diligence, usually do a lot of testing, sometimes a lot of activity, yet it's not really focused on preventing problems and understanding problems. It's usually responding or reacting to problems and issues. So every field problem results in a new test being implemented in production. And then pretty soon you have 3 days of testing, and many of which don't apply anymore. The more mature, the more mature organizations understand the failure mechanisms and design them out. So they use derating rules, they use design guidelines, for new technologies and so on, they ask the right questions, they do the risk assessments, those kinds of things. And they're rarely surprised by field problems or production problems. And so the culture in a manufacturing facility or in a product design company, pretty much, or in a factory, maintenance team on a factory floor, for example, the more proactive you are, the more you're looking for or anticipating problems and then dealing with them while they're still easy to deal with. But as you know, Mike, is if somebody comes up, seems like it's always Friday afternoon, and they say, well, we've had these 4 failures. We think it affects the week's production. Right. So some of it's on the floor, some of it's on a truck, some of it's at your customer site. And then what are you going to do? Right. So you have a lot of unknowns. You don't know how widespread the issue is. You don't know where the issue is. You don't know why it got missed until this point in time, and so on. You have to react to the situation in that regard. Yet many people then look at that particular circumstance and what can I do to, deal with those issues better? It's build a better fire department, for example. How can I respond better? Whereas the better question, a better culture in quality and reliability is, where did that mistake get made in our system such that it got that far? How do I anticipate and prevent not just that issue, but that type of issue, which is usually related to a decision? Who didn't have the right information at the right time to make the right decision? And how do I get the right circumstances together so we make the better decision each time? And the culture of an organization is it safe? If I'm on a production floor and I see something that's crap product going through, can I stop the line, or am I going to get yelled at? Right. So if there's an imbalance of too much pressure to ship it, and you tell me, if my boss tells me 6 times, just ship it, just ship it, just ship it. Oh, by the way, quality is important. I'm going to ship it. Right.
Sure.
As opposed to, here's why it's important. Here's why it makes a difference. This is how it affects our customers. This is how it affects our bottom line. And when somebody says, hey, this doesn't look right, it's respected that they said it doesn't look right. They may or may not be right, but let's look at it. It's not blame them for stopping the line. Let's understand what happened and deal with it, one good, bad, or indifferent, and fix the system. So the culture to me is all about how we make decisions. And a big part of what we do in the quality and reliability world is enable people to make a better decision more often. And sometimes that's control charts. Sometimes that's design, influencing the design. Sometimes it's connecting the impact of product failures to the cost to the organization and cost to our customer. So it can take a lot of different formats. It's usually a subtle change. Now, back to your prompt there about, we don't have time, but we always find time to fix it later, it's a classic symptom of a reactionary organization. And you can build a better fire department, or you can do fire prevention. Right? And it's hard to do both, because fire department is always urgent, right? It's always right now. We got to deal with it right now.
Well, that's another saying. We don't have time to work on the important, because we're working on the urgent.
That's right. And if you can get the virtuous cycle started where you're doing more prevention, then you have more time to be more attuned to preventing issues. And all the way back to HP, is we often got tagged to do projects for new technologies and new concepts, to understand how they would fail, to where are the weaknesses, what are the how should we design these things into our products. That is so rare anymore in any organization I deal with, anyway, that they take the time to characterize their technologies or processes so that they can optimize it to run well or be designed well. And it's rushing to market. It's keeping costs low. It's running a lean organization, whatever the flavor of the day or saying of the day is. Yet what it does is it doesn't allow time to say, oh, what do we need to know in order to make good decisions? And reliability often gets caught in that, because we can't measure it every day. Mike, is how much is this going to cost to ship? What's our profit margin on it? What's our market and expected sales per day, for example, or sales per quarter? Those you can measure. Bill of material you can measure every day. Whereas estimating the reliability, it's not easy to do, and it takes an investment. And even then, it's not precise. Although I often argue that a sales forecast is not all that precise either. But
on either side of the fence,
that's right.
It's a fuzzy science for sure.
But So I like connecting quality and reliability to the business and to the customers. What's the cost of a failure or a discrepancy to them and to us? And oftentimes the impact to the customer is very high, which it's not as simple as, they're down, ship them a new product, is they lose the service of what your product or system is providing them. And if that happens enough times, you're not going to have a customer anymore. So.
Right. Well, it's a good segue into my next question. A little bit of a diatribe followed up by a question. Okay. I've always been very interested in aviation. I got my pilot's license when I was, I think, 26 or 27 years old. And I've just always been that kid on the playground looking up, when I hear a noise from the sky. And I've read many articles recently about Boeing. And, once known as the undisputed premier aircraft builder, their reputation has been taking a beating lately by reports from both Boeing employees and its customers. Beginning with the 787 Dreamliner, Boeing moved its manufacturing plant from Washington State, where they have built aircraft for generations, to South Carolina, where they have not had experience building aircraft for generations. Mm-hmm. And not only did their geography change, according to the press and to whistleblowers, so did its manufacturing culture. And it's this culture that's being blamed for the problems with the 787 and more recently, the 737 MAX 8 and MAX 9 aircraft. Both of them brand new airplanes, both built in brand new facilities by brand new people, not all by brand new people, but by a lot of new people to that industry. And both grounded by the FAA shortly after production release. So my question for you, Fred, stems from the concept of culture on the manufacturing floor, any manufacturing floor. In your experience, how much does culture affect reliability?
Well, I started my career as a manufacturing engineer in a factory. And I learned very quickly that it's always the designer's fault. And I like reiterating that to any design teams I talk to, is the manufacturing team can't make it better. We can only make it to the design. And assuming the design is good, we'll have a reliable product. But we certainly can make it worse. And then to your question is the the culture there is what's susceptible to us. And I'm sure you've heard of the study on, I think it was engine blocks or transmissions. I forget, years and years ago, I think in the 70s, I think GM or Ford had a design, and these components were being made to the same design in two facilities, one in Detroit and one in Japan. And somebody got a hold of the information and started tracking the warranty claims on those components made in those two different realms. And they were night and day different. It shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that thinks about vehicles is that the folks in Japan had almost no return parts. No transmissions or engines came back for anything, any warranty claims on the parts that they were making, where Detroit did quite a bit. And so the question was why? And so they got a hold of a bunch of these engines and started making measurements. And the Detroit ones were all in specification, but a good number of them were right up against the edge of the specification for whatever dimension they were measuring. So if it was either in or out, kind of the classic definition in spec quality, right? In Japan, they were centered in very small variation on the targets. And there was this culture of continuous improvement throughout the plant, from the factory floors and the folks doing the castings and grinding all the way to senior management, that it was an ongoing, ever-present culture around making improvements, and all variation should be minimized. Where in Detroit, it was, hey, it's in spec, ship it. And so that's kind of a dramatic description of the change in culture. But I think there's other things at play when you go to a new line and you have new people, or even when you bring in a new hire. Well, they don't have all the lore and wisdom of what even to look for. You know, when you see an object or a system or a process for the first time, it's a learning exercise to what goes where and what are the steps involved. But we don't have any feedback as to what's the level of completion that makes a difference. So there's going to be more variability until you start getting feedback to that person saying, oh, this needs this torque to this specification. Otherwise, it's going to be too loose and that nut falls off. That would be a problem, for example.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who's in a media company that serves our industry, and he was interviewing me a few months ago, and he referred to the silver tsunami, and I'm like, what's a silver tsunami? And it's this tendency for all the people with all the wisdom, the wise sages in all these companies, subject experts on specific products, leaving, retiring, and not being replaced. They were, a jack of all trades, maybe master of none, but they knew where all the skeletons were buried, and they knew things that weren't documented. And these folks are leaving and not being replaced by people whose job it is just to know stuff.
Right. I've heard that in the maintenance world too. There is a large part of our generation that's just hitting into retirement, and that held these positions in engineering and in maintenance world. And it's an issue, but it takes time to master whatever technique or process or assembly we're doing, and paying attention to what's important. Now, I'm quite sure the new factories had targets, so many aircraft per week and so many steps accomplished and so many new hires and so on. And it's a challenge in and of itself just to accomplish that. So I'm quite sure they had measures and metrics to promote those things. And I have no firsthand knowledge of the different cultures in these places, but at some point it has to be inoculated that this subtle difference makes a difference. And that often is not written down. And that silver tsunami is just exacerbating it. But I've had people and vendors, they say, oh, we moved from our factory from Taiwan to Vietnam, and we moved the equipment. We, recreated it exactly. We put in the exact same people, and it's different. We can measure the difference in the performance of those components. right?
Right.
And it could be, there's so many little things that make a big difference. And that takes time. And Boeing's not going to build 20 aircraft just to get the process primed and ready to go and go make sure they work. I don't think.
Well, we certainly don't want to fly on those first 20 if that's the case, right?
But it's, on an electronics line, we often run test circuits and we run a few boards through it. But if they cost $50,000 each, we're not going to run very many of those through as test boards.
That's right. Well, that was a absolute perfect segue to the next statement I was going to make, which has to do with exporting manufacturing to other countries. And, if I look at going back to Boeing, if Boeing had issues that stemmed from moving from one U.S. state to another U.S. state, how do companies who export production across oceans to countries with different languages and cultures control production to the extent that reliability is maintained?
You reminded me of I was in college, there was like a family thing going on in the campus, and we were in the dining hall, and there was a family from the deep South. I think they were from Alabama, Birmingham, I think, somewhere like that, deep Southern drawl. And the other half of the table was from Boston. And one family member asked the other end of the table to pass the salt and pepper, and they did not understand each other. Yeah, I'm from Wisconsin, so I was able to translate for them. And I argue that going from the Northwest to the Southeast is like two different countries. But even if you move a production line from one side of the factory to the other side of the factory, alignment, the amount of vibration it receives, the amount of light available for inspections, those subtle differences can make a difference. Now, moving overseas, then we add time zones and language barriers and cultural barriers. I learned the hard way that you have to phrase questions very carefully. When I was working with teams in Singapore, is like, all right, here's a new circuit board. We want to do X, Y, and Z with it. Can you make that happen? And they'll look at me and go, yes. And then later I learned that yes meant they heard the question. They had no idea if it would work or not, but they were not willing to say no at all. The NO was not part of their language and culture.
I have a very similar experience. I used to travel quite a bit to China, and we don't build anything in China, but we sell equipment to China. And someone told me this, but I really didn't take it seriously until I experienced it. The word no is rude and it doesn't come up. So you might be negotiating and you won't hear no, where you would hear no here quite easily. But the term that could be difficult could be translated as hell no.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be difficult means it's not going to happen. It's not difficult. Yeah. It's impossible. But don't hear, if you wait for the word no,
that's right.
You're not going to hear it.
Exactly right. And so there's different ways of getting things done. There's different approaches and interpretations of what does it mean to run this inspection or do this test. A few years ago, I had a client that was mass producing a consumer product in China, and they had been for about 5 or 6 years, and they were looking at doing an improvement on it. And I thought, well, you've been building this for a long time. I understand you do a lot of testing every month on a sample of these products that are relevant for what we're studying. Let's pull up that data and take a look at it. Now, that's my statistician side coming out. I love a good pile of data. It took me 3 months to find the data. Everybody knew it existed. And it was by chance at lunch one day, I sat down next to this woman from the finance group that happened to be working on paying those bills for those tests. And she said, you don't have the data? Well, I'm going to stop paying for it. And I'm sure they'll show us where the data is real quick. And it still took a month. And I finally got a hold of this gentleman, and I'm sure it was some basement of some Chinese factory, some city factory thing. And he goes, you're the first person that has ever asked to see this. And so it presented all kinds of issues, but we do that all too often, is that they were asked to run the test and collect the data. And so as soon as I plotted the data, it forecast every field issue they had. I'm exaggerating. I think it missed one or two. But anytime they had a major escalation, they had ample warning from their monthly testing before it became a big issue. And they were never compelled to tell anybody, because talking about failures and problems meant, one, that their production line would be slowed down or shut down and they'd be blamed, or, well, nobody asked us to do this. You said, collect the data and store it. That's what we're doing. And we're doing what you asked us to do. So a big part of working overseas, or even at the factory across the street, is be very, very clear about the desired outcome and what we're both trying to achieve and what's expected from what's the scope of what we're asking them to do. If it's strictly follow the procedure, well, you better have a really good procedure that covers everything you want. Even if they see something odd or weird or bad, if it's not in the procedure and you're requiring that procedure, they're not going to tell you.
Well, you want them to follow not the letter of the procedure, but the spirit of the procedure. And that in many cases is not translatable.
And it's also hard to contract. So we tend to fall back on what we can contract for and hold each other accountable for. And we set agreements there. What I've seen it done successfully, though, is that the teams get together and they have a common objective. They get very, very clear on what we're trying to achieve. And here's my strengths, here's your strengths. Let's share those so that we get better at at what we do, and to each other's mutual benefit. And that helps to bridge into that shared letter of or spirit of the law, or spirit of the concept. But it's so often that it's adversarial. In when I rail against procurement engineers or procurement managers that are, vetting one vendor off another one and keeping them at arm's length. And
so do we. Yeah. It's a race to the bottom.
That's right.
On both sides. They're going to get what they pay for.
Exactly.
So I'm going to ask you, my next question is going to be to ask you about your companies. Before I do that, about 10 or 15 minutes before we started recording this episode, you tweeted at FMS Reliability, what is your favorite story concerning reliability? In a couple minutes or less, I'm going to turn that tweet back on you. What is your favorite story concerning reliability?
This was one of those Friday afternoon phone calls. Kathy was a technical sales engineer at HP. And she called and she just sounded weary. And she said, we just made the first shipment this morning of laptops of it was tens of millions of dollars of server equipment and all kinds of other computer equipment that was going to this big company. And she had worked for months, if not years, to secure that sale and that contract, and was part of a team doing that. And they called her and said, you need to come in here tomorrow and tell us why we should continue with delivery of the rest of this order when 7 out of the first 10 laptops we opened up had cracked screens and failed. We're dead on arrival. And the company is saying a big part of what you sold us on is how reliable and durable and robust your products are. And we have evidence here, 7 out of the first 10 are bad. So you need to come in tomorrow, and we're going to, our team that can cancel this order is going to sit here and you need to convince us that the rest of the shipments will be good. And Kathy, I don't work in the laptop division. I don't work in any of these divisions. I really can't, how can I help you? And she said, yeah, I'm doing all the right things and replacing the laptops and getting all the divisions involved, but I need to tell them about our culture. And somebody said I should call you. And I said, all right. So we talked about the training and the derating and the approach of the reliability work that we do in vast majority of the divisions. And she was taking notes and feeling that this is going to help bolster her argument that, yes, we stand behind our product and we should be in good shape. And then she paused. And it was as if she was talking to herself. She says, I can't do this anymore. And I'm sorry. And I wasn't sure if I heard her or not. Right. And she goes, no, I'm sorry. I am having trouble just dealing with this anymore. Our products are built, their reputation is built on their quality and reliability. And that's what we use to sell them, because that's what our better customers are looking for. They're not looking for the cheapest. They're looking for something that just works. And when my personal reputation is on the line, when a product gets delivered and it doesn't work, that's a personal hit. And she said, I can't take it anymore. It's too stressful not knowing if our product is going to satisfy the customer's requirements. I can't, in good faith, promise that and then it not happening. That's destroying me. And we talked about that for a little bit. But it brought home to me early in my career how visceral reliability is and quality is to not just the customer and their use of the product, not just to our profit margin and being able to charge more for it, but how important that promise is. It's not that we have a warranty and you're covered. It's that it works like it should. And delivering on that, it becomes a heart or a soul of the company. And once that starts to erode, you start to lose that I don't know what's the right word for it, but that essence of how we operate and think as a company. And so it helped me to double down on how to approach reliability as a part of the culture. And then it's way more important than just what's our warranty returns. It's way beyond that. It's our internal thought process and care for our products and for our customers. And reliability is often that thread that goes from design all the way through the life cycle of the product, all the way through the customer side of it, that makes a difference. And so that story, that phone call, I should say, it's not a story, it's a phone call, really made me believe that I can make a difference in reliability, and have over the years. And it really comes from that phone call from Kathy so many years ago.
Oh, very good. So tell me about your companies. There's FMS Reliability, which I assume are your initials, Fred, yep. And Ascendo Reliability. Tell me the difference between the two companies and what their mission is.
Well, the FMS Reliability is just me. It's a consultancy, and recently I've been outsourcing projects to a trusted colleague of mine. I'm at a spot where I really don't relish getting on airplanes anymore, despite our conversation about 737 earlier. It's just the time and travel and
it's not fun anymore.
It's not as fun. Yeah, it's been great fun. But I want to focus more on the Ascendo side of the business. So my consultancy is local or doing it remotely with people. And I've done plenty of remote projects over the years, or very, very, very interesting projects with business class, I should say. But I've been consulting for 6-8 years at HP and then 15 years on my own. And love it. Absolutely love the consultancy. And it's a mix of training and coaching, some engineering management with the assessments and helping develop programs and the cultures and organizations. And then a good mix of specific projects like an accelerated life test or an FMEA or a failure analysis, things like that. And you never know what's coming in. It could be solar, it could be automotive, it could be aerospace, it could be high tech. My first project, by the way, was a hot tub. The siding on a hot tub was falling off, and I helped them figure out how to attach it correctly.
And I assume plenty of testing in the field is necessary for that, right?
Well, that was the problem, is putting it in the sun out in Tucson. It still took all summer. And so we created a jig that replicated the amount of motion that was imparted by the temperature cycles. And so we were able to test different fastening techniques within an afternoon by just cycling it the polymer they were using would expand in the extrusion direction, and we knew that distance, so we created a jig that would replicate that distance and those forces. So it was pretty cool. They didn't give me a hot tub.
That's where I was going with that. Yeah. Test it, every day, get in, get out, get
That's
in,
right.
get out,
So
grab a drink,
they didn't give me one of those.
See how long it lasts. Well, oh well. At least you know which one to buy if you had to buy one. And then there's Accendo Reliability, which is a gathering place for everything reliability, from podcasts to links to webinars to articles about reliability from all sorts of different industries. It is a huge, valuable resource for reliability engineers. Tell me more about that.
Okay. Well, thanks for that description. I'll have to steal that. Remember back at HB, we had I described a email list that we were able to share knowledge across the organization pretty quickly.
Sure.
All right. We also had a small repository of, lessons learned, and we had engineering guideline manuals. I think there's 3 different manuals that I helped update and revise and maintain that were kind of our collective knowledge around things. And we also, where I played a role in the organization is that touchstone for, hey, have you seen any issues with, and they'd fill in the blank. And usually enough people would call that, oh, okay, this is a big issue, we need to deal with it, or here's a good answer that these guys already found, and so on. So it was a clearinghouse of information. And I would regularly get, what's a good university program to go to? What's a recommended book for this? What conference should I go to? So I regularly ended up doing research for those things, or keeping track of which ones were recommended, and would compile those kinds of lists. And so about the time I was leaving HP, in and around that time, and I was starting my own business, I also was the chair of the ASQ's Reliability Division, the American Society for Quality, I think is the acronym. And I wanted to replicate that clearinghouse of resources and information for the members of the division, the reliability division, and for just the community at large. And I figured if we did something of value to the community, we would get more members. And it happened to be during the second year when I was the chair, we were the only division that not only maintained their membership, but actually grew. And then after telling me I can't do all this stuff and advertising things that weren't ASQ things, they were asking me how I did that, which is kind of ironic. But anyway, I ended up creating a lot of those structures outside of ASQ because they wouldn't let me do it inside. And so the calendar and the resource lists and things like that, articles, those all started to take shape underneath a section of the FMS Reliability site. But I quickly realized that I wanted it to be a platform for the clearinghouse, much as you described it, Mike, as a place to go that if you need a quick answer, you can find a short tutorial or a description or a definition or a formula or whatever. You could find it. I'm still working on the finding it bit. Google's my friend, but it's not well. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's not structured to help you very well yet. We're working on that this year. The other part was I knew that if I created it all myself, it would never be good enough to be a good resource and hub. There's just too much material to be in it. And I wasn't going to get venture capital to go get authors and contributors. So I approached a number of our colleagues in the business of saying, hey, if we combine our blogs and if we do podcasts and we create content for this platform, not exclusive, you keep your brand, you can do call to actions back to your own business. That's all fine. Google likes it because there's regularly new material, right? There's more content and resources for people to come back to and look for.
Sure, their algorithm is happy.
Right. And on the other side, is that you get exposure to an audience that you couldn't build. It would be very, very difficult for you to build on your own. So let's combine forces. And it was just a handshake. We all started contributing articles, and we were doing podcasts and doing other stuff like this and gathering resources. And I think at the last count, I had like 25 different contributors, yourself included. And hopefully it's helped you with your downloads and exposure for your podcast.
I'm sure it has. Absolutely.
Right? And so that's the idea, is that unlike ASQ and most other businesses that are loath to mention anything that remotely competes with them, Ascendo tries to find every offering of webinars every month. We just sent it out yesterday, and I think we had 30 plus sources, and I think we listed 40 webinars coming up in May dealing with some aspect of reliability. I take the liberty of putting my podcast or my webinar at the top of the list. Everything else is in calendar order.
Well, I think you've earned that.
But it's that service to the organization. So we list university programs worldwide. We have resources and ebooks and courses and the podcast network. I think we have 6 or 7 podcasts. Article series. I think we're close to 1,500 articles, everything from risk management to FMEA and everything in between. The platform continues to grow. I keep getting requests for, hey, how do I contribute to this? And the filter we apply is that if you're providing value to the reader or to the listener, you're in. If you provide a sales pitch, we're not interested. Right? But it's okay to provide value and say, hey, this came from XYZ company. If you want more, see us here. So I think that's probably one of the few cardinal rules for the site. But after that, it's be of service to the industry, be of service to the visitor or the reader or listener.
Well, that definitely rings a bell. We stopped exhibiting at trade shows and we stopped advertising in magazines several years ago and switched over to an educational platform because our belief is that educated people make educated choices. And, we can only ring the bell so many times and say, our pumps are bigger than their pumps and we're cooler than them and we're fat. It's all noise. It's just noise today. And because everyone now has the ability to create noise on a pretty level scale. So it's very difficult from that noise to differentiate and discern, what you're looking for and what they're offering you. So we just bailed out of that boat of marketing and sales and strictly just do things like this, the podcast, the webinars, the technical articles, the conferences, the symposiums, where we don't speak about what we do. We speak about industry best practices. And hopefully people see the line. They can connect the dots that if we're talking about best practices in a certain industry, we probably are following those best practices in that certain industry. So I like your approach. I love the fact that it's collaborative, not commercial, and it's designed to educate the reliability inclined public to follow those types of reliability best practices and learn from each other. That's what really attracted me to your efforts through Ascendo Reliability.
Great. Yeah, it really came home to me a few years ago. Well, geez, almost 10 years ago now. Ended up being one of my favorite clients. We had great projects. We did accelerated life testing and a number of other bits and pieces in the project. And after a few months of working with her, I asked her, why did you come with FMS Reliability? Why did you pick me, essentially? And she said, I was at the conference and I don't know if you remember, but we met there and I asked you a question about accelerated testing and you answered it. You said, this is a way to approach it. Here's a reference for it. And I really had no recollection of that at all, but that's typical of me. I would just answer the question if I could. If I'm standing there and I can answer your question, I'll answer the question. She said, she approached 20 other people that were either businesses or consultants. And within 30 seconds, every one of them was, how much money do you have and do you want a proposal?
What can I say to make you buy from me today?
Exactly. And I find that the content marketing approach, the educating, you said it exactly right, is an educated customer it makes better decisions. And I'd rather work with somebody that knows what they're doing and knows what they're looking for.
Right.
And so it's come around. I don't overtly advertise, and it certainly comes back though. And one of the great parts about Ascendo is that it's a platform that can scale. So the more people that are involved with it, the more powerful the site is, the more content rich the site is, and the more exposure that colleagues and other consultants and other businesses that serve our industry can thrive. And it's not a zero-sum game. If my competitors are doing well, I think all ships rise with the tide. We all do well.
That's very true. So we have to wrap up, but I'm going to encourage all of our listeners to check out that website, Ascendo Reliability, ACCENDO reliability.com. And if you're into the podcast side, there's a link to the podcast site from there too, but that would be reliability.fm, like FM radio. And there's a lot of very interesting reliability-based podcasts, including this. I'll plug my own there too. And it's a great resource for that. Fred, thank you so much for joining me today. You were a great guest, and I really appreciate the time that you've given me today.
Oh, it was a joy. I really appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for the invite.
Well, that's another episode. Thanks for listening to Reliability Matters. If you like what you hear, please be sure to give us a like. Just click the like or heart button below. If there are any reliability-based questions you'd like to have answered or specific topics discussed, let me know. I can be reached at mike@mikeconrad.com. That's Conrad with a K. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe to Reliability Matters on iTunes or follow us on Spotify. You can also listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, aqueoustech.com, PCBchat.com, Spreaker.com, or our newest affiliate, Ascendo Reliability, on reliability.fm, a site dedicated to all things reliability. Once again, thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of Reliability Matters. In the meantime, keep doing it right.